Next on the list is to get this pilot bushing out of here. I already tried a little bit. I went at it with a set of these. Didn't get me anywhere, so I think I'm going to go right to the old bread trick, which I've used before to remove a pilot bushing like this. I got this socket with a extension in it the wrong way, so it's pretty blocked off on the end. And I'm going to shove some bread in there, hammer this thing in, and hope it comes out. This is the only bread I have. I wish I had some like Wonder Bread or whatever, but I mean, I figure this will work fine with the seeds and stuff in it. It's just, I like this bread. Yeah, so the bread thing, it's just not working this time. I'm not sure if it's because my socket that I'm using isn't fitting just perfectly in that hole, or if something's leaking through where I have the ratchet extension in it or whatever, but that's not working. So we're on to plan B. Professional weld jobs done on there, and we're good. I'm gonna put that on the wall with my other battles I've won. Evidence of won battles. And that goes on the wall with the other bread removed pilot bushing. The transmission side of the motor is completely torn down now. I got that pilot bushing out. I got some stuff cleaned up down there, ready to go, ready to put the new parts in so I can put this 2G transmission in. When I need these kind of parts, when I needed guidance on what the steps were, what parts I needed to get this 2G trans in the car, I went to Kigley Racing. I've been going to Kigley Racing for a lot of reasons for a very long time. Kigley Racing, I can't thank them enough for what they've done for the DSM community, the parts that they've made, and the things that they've learned through their own, logging, sensor stuff and learning how this stuff works. They put in the effort so that we can reap the rewards, and that's awesome. They have all these cool parts. So for one, I have this is the 6-bolt to a 2G trans adapter. It's essentially a spacer. It has something to do with the converter depth in the pump of the transmission, so this spacer sets that just right when putting a 2G trans and a 2G converter on a 1G engine or a 6-bolt engine. So yeah, this thing's cool. It's kind of a two-piece spacer. We got this part, and we have this part. And these two pieces basically go together like this. Two pieces makes it easier to fit up. There's some hardware here that holds these two pieces together, and some long dowels to make up for the difference that this spacer is going to have on the length of those dowels. So that's pretty much my next step, is to get that mounted up. After that, I gotta go ahead and put on my new flex plate, because I did ruin my other flex plate trying to get that converter off of there through that mess. But here's our SFI spec 29.1 Kigley Racing 6-bolt flex plate, which is great. Awesome that they make that. And you know what? Here's an interesting part of my new upgrade, is this flex plate has 8 bolt holes here, but the 1G converter only has 4 pads on the converter to bolt it to. The 2G converter has a different 4-bolt pattern, and the Precision Industries converter that I'm putting in the car has all 8. So that's great, you know, for keeping the converter bolted to the flex plate. After that flex plate goes on, I'll be putting on this new spacer ring. 6 bolt holes in it, goes on after the flex plate, and before this ARP hardware kit goes on and gets torqued to 130 foot-pounds to try to keep that flex plate from loosening up again. Oh, don't forget the Loctite. I'll be using this new Loctite I got. I was using this old, it's a big container of Loctite I've had for years. I've been using it for a while. Seems to work, but my flex plate bolts did come loose here. So, trying to figure out why they would come loose, and I'm noticing I don't even see any Loctite residue or anything on any of this stuff. I think that that's just old Loctite and it just rattles loose. Sometimes when I disassemble stuff, I find that Loctite, and you know, I can just flake it off or whatever. So I bought some new Loctite recently because I used up that old tube of Loctite that I had. I think I mentioned it in a video a while back. Got this new Loctite, and I used it on my converter bolts one time, and just in that one time I noticed how much more difficult it is to get those converter bolts loose with that Loctite. So I'll be using that new Loctite on the face of the crank, the back of the flex plate, the back of the spacer plate onto the flex plate, as well as soaking those bolts. Those new ARP hardware is going to be soaked in a real name brand Loctite that's not 20 years old. And I'm hoping that'll hold this together. So I better get started. There's those long dowels. Here we have the Kigley adapter installed. This plate goes on first with these countersunk bolts, screws. Then the other half goes on, gets bolted together with these nuts and bolts here. You can see the longer dowels protruding out, and they protrude the right amount when you count the spacer in here. And everything's pretty much ready to go. Pilot bushings installed. And there is the flex plate, spacer ring, and flex plate bolts installed. Take a good look at how much Loctite is on there. I put Loctite on both sides of the flex plate, and on the spacer plate, spacer ring, and on the bolts heavily, and torqued them to 130 foot-pounds. There's no chance I'm starting this thing today, so there's no real worry about this, but normally I make sure I don't run the engine for 24 hours after doing this, or converter bolts, or whatever that is going to be on the engine. Now it's time to drop the converter in there and hoist this thing up in the car, see how it fits. The converter is my new Precision Industries billet torque converter. Now it's not billet like a full billet torque converter where the cover's billet, every part of it's billet. But the Precision Industries torque converter is basically known to be the best working available option, readily available option, I guess I should say, for DSM. And that's the reason I've decided to go through this work of swapping to a 2G. We got some a 2G transmission. We got some stickers and instructions here. We got some bolts here. And then buried underneath this foam that's holding this thing in here pretty good is the precision converter. You can tell by that fancy color. You can also see that I'm not going to be able to lift this out of here with one hand, so hold on. There it is. This is their number 6 converter. I spoke to Kevin at Kigley Racing, and we decided what my goals were, and then we decided number 6 would get me there. So we're going to give it a shot, see how it works. Precision does give you one free restall. So if it isn't quite right, you can have it adjusted. And that's a pretty cool thing. So this converter is a little smaller in diameter than the stock one. You can see how the starter gear kind of sticks out quite a bit there. But here we go, trying to lift this with one hand again. But let me show you the part that is billet on this. That part. So this is designed specifically for a 2G DSM with the 8 converter bolt pads, like I was talking about, which is really cool. You got your converter snout down there, which I'll be sure to grease real good in case that had anything to do with my issue I ran into. But I got to drop this thing into the transmission, then I'll grease that up, and then we'll hook this thing on the hoist and pull it up in there. All right, we're just going to put some transmission fluid in this converter, which you should do when you're installing a converter fresh. Put a half a quart or so in there before you drop it in. The snout of my converter seized in my pilot bushing was because the flex plate bolts came loose, but you're really supposed to grease up this snout anyway, so I'm going to do that. And there it is, 2G transmission and a 1G. You can see that spacer plate there between the engine and the transmission. I did have to do some clearancing in some spots to get this to come in here, or get this to fit in here. For one, I had to do some clearancing right here. I did a tiny bit of clearancing on the frame rail here. At some point, this is going to get cut and tubed in the front, so that won't be an issue, but for now, that's what I did to get by. I had the clearance way down there. You can see the K-member. I think it actually still touches the trans right there. In a tiny little spot, the K-member touches the trans. I ground that little collar or whatever that is that bolts in around the diff. I ground it down, but it's still touching, just barely. We barely got this thing in here, but it does fit. that'll do it for today. We'll see you next time.
Put cheese on it.